Okay, I think I wanted to present this slide just to say sort of formally what I had refined about the pitch. Like, we want to do X with HRS. Can I do it? Well, one thing is just to ask somebody. And so I think maybe what we should do actually in the time remaining is do some of those. Ask, and then we'll just do it, and I'll show you kind of how you figure it out. The other things I wanted to say up front about it were that, you might think about the keywords of the thing that you're looking for and try to understand how it would be asked in a survey, because sometimes those are very different than the way we tend to conceptualize it. And then keyword search, that's often what I resort to, just to look at the documentation and try to find some trace of what you're interested in. I would start with the RAND file, and I'll show you what that documentation looks like. You can keyword search that. You can also look at, in the PDF, there's a very nice table of contents. You can also look at a particular wave and just look through the entire code book, which is basically it's a text version of the entire questionnaire, and just try to find your keyword in there. That's a very good way to go, and I do it all the time. And there also then is this online question concordance. I'll click here and should hopefully pull us up into part of the HRS website. This basically does the same thing in a much better way, in a way that also will get you pages and pages and pages and pages of results. And so often what I like to do is just look at one survey's codebook or questionnaires and try to keep it simple, because I'm pretty stupid. and if you do this, gosh, what's a good one to check? So caregiving maybe, or care, that might be a good one. If we're talking about time use and care.
You might get 10 million things.
Yeah, we're probably going to get 10 million things. So filters, suppose we chose core modules. So HRS modules, it means that the thing isn't asked of everybody and it's not asked all the time. But you may not need it to be. It may be a specialized type of thing that only was asked once. For example, in 2014, I think people were asked about their pet ownership, which I thought was a very fun little module to look at. And you don't really need it, to be measured all over the place. Let's just see what happens if I do that. If I click core, I think it's going to pull up everything from all these years, and I'm going to hit search. And I think that's thinking. There we go. Loading, please wait. Okay, so it's a ton of stuff. Do you have any difficulty taking care of your own personal needs? So that's own disability. So, right, I think Dennis and Gretchen and I were talking about time use, and what's nice is that we are aware that HRS actually has an entire time use survey. So how do you know whether it does? Let's see. I think what we might want to do is go back again to the main. So if we just type health and retirement study, I bet in Google, just to start over from baseline, do we get the right lengths rather? Links, LINKS. So there's the first link, is indeed what you want, the main page of HRS. And so I'll click through to the researcher site. And data products is where I'm eventually going to want to go. There's a ton up here. The first is about, and then documentation. Data products and public survey data, I think, would probably be the quickest way to get to where we want. Public survey data. This will tell you a bunch of things. Oh, okay, look at that funny nav bar that's opening up there. Tracker file, off your studies. I'm looking for the CAMs of the time use. Already I think we have been bombarded by too much information on this particular page. If you go to data products, public survey data, oh, I see how they do it. Yeah, this is not that obvious. There's the magic link. If you click registered user up here in the first paragraph, that will bring you to a much more parsimonious look at things. So if you have not signed up for HRS, you're going to want to click new users and fill out the sign up sheet. I'm a registered user and my browser even knows who I am, and I'm going to just click on through. And to me, the data downloads page, so there's several different layers of the onion here, and I promise this will eventually look a lot more. Well, it's jammed all together, I guess.
But at least it's sort of in one screen.
It's sort of in one screen. It's not lines and lines and lines of confusing stuff. Okay, how would you ever know that? Well, there's CAM's spending data there, that shows up. The time use stuff that we were talking about, I think debuted with the CAMs in 2001. And I think, why is the time use stuff not in this CAM spending data? Just as a side note, so let me click on this. Here is, okay, the RAND HRS longitudinal file is what you should do. This is the very top link here under RAND contributed files, and let me just click and show you what happens when you dive in there. If you want, you can look at just the codebook. Let me go ahead and do that. I've downloaded a local file myself, but this is exactly the right thing to do. I think here we will not get the nifty side tabs that I will if I look over here in my copy of preview and I pull this up. Which one is it again here? Well, it's called that. They keep changing the name. Right there it is. It's that. Yeah. Okay. And here I've already searched for some stuff. Divorce. Okay. So if you look at view, and if you're on a Mac, table of contents. If you're on a PC, I apologize for the difference here, but table of contents will pull this up, and the data codebook is one of the entries here over on the left-hand side, the table of contents. And this is a very nice overview of what's in the data set. Here it also gives you a sense as well along the left-hand side nav bar. Sections A, B, C is the one that had health, didn't it, earlier? Section B, okay. So I think this is the different sections of the RAND documentation. At the front of the data codebook is a list of all of the different variables underneath each of these particular sections that they've set up. Yeah, sorry, it's been a while that I've tried to walk this through in a didactic sense. The sections here, when you think of a section, well, it could be a section of the actual survey, and that is actually not a one-to-one correspondence here with what they've got, and they've actually called them different things. But suppose you were interested in the self-report of health. That's the first one under health, and the codebook will tell you what's happening in each of these. So here's the first wave, the respondent self-reported health, and they give you total counts of the different remarks, excellent, very good, good, fair, poor in the first wave. And so eyeballing it, it's something on the order of 10,000 or so responses. Respondents and spouses, of course, combined together there. Okay, so you can pick through it. Care, I think, was something that we'd searched for earlier. You can just do a keyword search in the PDF. That's one helpful thing to do. And you will find a ton of stuff. Care is a pretty bad word, isn't it?
Yeah. How about time use? That phrase?
Yeah, you might find that. There again, I mean, the problem is that it's time use is not the way it would be asked in the survey.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's one problem. Yeah. I think what we see is, unfortunately, is figuring out how to use a data set often requires asking another human about how to get started with it. So anyway, let me just finish the story here. This is the sub page for the RAND contributions for the HRS longitudinal file. And that's what I think that you should start with. And the question is going to be, if you don't use SAS, SPSS, or Stata, what can you do? So usually if you use R, for example, R will load stuff in using some package that understands Stata or SAS or something like that. SPSS, I think, is borderline deprecated, honestly. I mean, some of these RAND files don't have the SPSS versions there, so I think probably sticking with either SAS or Stata and reading that stuff into whatever you need is probably the way to go. This is a challenge with the RAND version of the data because they don't actually give you the text files. Yeah. So do folks want to talk about that at all, about how to physically do this and what programs they're using?
I used to export it in R, but I guess it was still in Unity, so I loaded it in Stata and then I exported it as a CSV with all the labels and everything. But
Okay.
obviously R would not read the labels.
Yeah.
It would just read the columns, and sometimes it misreads the ideas of number versus text.
Yeah, let me quickly go back to this example I had. Here's a good version of it. So if you look at the marital status, this is kind of where it's going to potentially bite you. Is that variable coded as a 1 or a 5 or a 2, 3, 4, etc.? Or is it actually coded as this string? And if that's a string, then on the one hand you know what it means, but it's also potentially going to foul up your statistics package. Yeah. So if you use Stata or SAS, it kind of does that for you. If you use something else like R, which is more proletarian, isn't it? It's you got to do it by your bootstraps, or you have to find an R module. It's also free. It's free. Yeah. Well, if you're starting your graduate career, I think R is a great one to start with. It's just that everything has a steep learning curve, and ours I think is quite steep because of this issue.
I think, as you said, finding the right package. Because I think I spent an hour looking for a package to import SAS files into R, and it doesn't marvelously, but it took a while.
So you found it, but it took you an hour. Okay.
It's literally, the name of the package is the extension.
Also, now with the most recent iteration of RStudio, when you read in a file, there's a drop-down menu where you can specify that it's a SAS file.
Mm-hmm.
So it's now, it loads a package called foreign for you, so that feature is now endogenous to the new update to RStudio.
Foreign can read in Stata files later than 12 for some reason. It keeps errors, so sometimes,
I have not had that problem.
Interesting.
I think.
Yeah, you could try just refreshing your version of RStudio and seeing if it.
So for HRS, they explicitly save it in either version 11 or 12. I think probably because of that. I don't know what happened and why they. Anyway, but yeah. Was there another? Yeah. These sorts of things are why I think user groups are really, really helpful. If we can sort of make an HRS user group, I think that would be good. And you could find R user groups. I think one of the challenges there is that I don't, so there's an R user group, you gotta get the Venn diagram, right, and how to get a good overlap, and I don't know how many R users actually use HRS. And I think it's, this is kind of a not so subtle clue that looking at this, the fact that these are distributed in SAS, Stata, and SPSS kind of tells you something about who is using these data and what they're accustomed to doing. So in preparation for this workshop, I was looking at this issue, and I think it's a bit of a thin subpopulation of our folks who use HRS.
Well, and I think most people who would want to do their statistics in R or something would use Stata or SPSS or SAS to get the extract of what they want and then do your stats somewhere else, because it's no matter what you do, at least maybe my R is out of date, but at least no matter how you suck it into R, you're still going to lose all of those labels and the handy things that help you sort of make your extracts and do your merges in the way that you're okay, it did what I think it's supposed to do.
Right, I think if you just, and this is all data stuff, is if you send it out in a file that R can read very well, then R does fabulous visualizations, but I would personally trust data many times over in terms of its statistical abilities, because data, again, it is vetted by software developers, while R, you're at the mercy of whoever created that package, so sometimes it depends.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch all that unfold. Do you remember R exists? I wanted to start kind of coming into its own, because I feel like, I'm a dinosaur by comparison. I don't think any of this stuff.
Well, when I started grad school, I used
S,
yes, we learned S in this building. And then And then R, the free version, came up, but I mean, I think the fact that it was free meant that it got a lot more
Yeah.
juice, like, around the world also.
Yeah.
Because not
Yeah.
everybody was in institutions that wanted to pay for licenses and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, should we look at the time use data, the consumption, CAMs, time use? Why don't we spend a second? So how would you know that time use is in the CAMs? Yeah, that's a good question.
What if you search for like duration or something on the word?
In the concordance maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, or minutes or something like that.
Oh,
Duration,
yeah.
I don't know. So here's the thing, how do you
Yeah.
specify core
Calling for
modules,
results.
crossway, public? Yeah. Well, the other problem is, I suspect we might not be searching in the mail-out surveys, of which CAMS is, and so, if we just clear all the filters, I wonder if that just gives us everything. So let's just do duration. No. How long did this limitation last? Yeah. This is definitely the cursed side of the blessing of having a very deep data set that you can get just a bazillion things that you don't care about when you're trying to keyword search. I guess another thing, so I think I've got a slide showing something that's helpful, what's covered by HRS. Here I wanted to show this one at some point, okay. So this is helpful, what's where. This is the disposition of the RAND codebook, which again is a little different from if you look at the underlying data and the sections in the actual survey. And so this gives you a sense of what's covered where, and nowhere does time use show up. It's because it's in this separate thing altogether. If you're interested in immigration background, I think that's all in section A in the RAND file with the demographics. Health, income, Social Security, and benefits, pensions, expectations. I'm not sure I spoke highly enough, actually, of how the expectations stuff in the HRS are just really amazing. So they're all, I guess this sort of psychological research might be really interesting, but it also, in many parts of social science, you might really be interested in how people are perceiving certain things in describing their behavior, and HRS really is rather unique in providing that. Here's a very busy graphic explaining the supplemental off-year surveys in some of the HRS documentation, and there's a bunch. Consumption and activities, I guess that's where the time use is, the activities. Collects extensive information about individuals' time use and household patterns of spending. Yeah, it's been a while since I've looked at this. I guess RAND decided that they were going to look at the spending and make that a nicely formatted longitudinal thing about, how much do you spend on gas for your car and how much do you spend on groceries and things like that. The time use is there, but it appears that they haven't streamlined that. And then there are many other things here on this very busy page, but that's one way in which it shows up, time use. I guess, maybe this administrative document that they put together, so let me go back to so here's the graphic we just saw. It's in this PDF called Aging in the 21st Century. It's hyperlinked on the second page, I think, of my slides. And so this might, to be honest, might be a good place to look. I think Gretchen suggested this. Let's look for time use. Bam, we found it. It's in that graphic I just showed you. Let's look for immigrant. That's another maybe focal point of interest here. And so, we see some hits, not a ton in this. It's probably because it's a bit different in nature from time use. Time use is kind of a specialized thing that not all surveys ask about. Immigration status is somewhat more standard. Nativity, at least for the individual, is often measured, and it's in the main core data set, I think. Employment history, we might just do employment. And so that'll pull up some hits within here as well. Yeah. Each of these is kind of a multi-minute process of trying to track them all down. Should we do the time use? Should we look at cams?
Sure.
Let's just have a look at that. Okay, so let's go back to our data downloads page. My favorite part actually about this page, this looks exactly the same as it did back in the late 90s. They have not prettified this particular HTML at all. Yeah, it's kind of fun and old school, but you know what? If it works, don't fix it, right? Okay, so here's where we were. I see. The longitudinal file, we could look at the CAM spending data also, but what that's going to show us is not the time use stuff. The CAMs also shows up over here. These are all grouped by the year in which they went out, and so let's just click over here on the mail out CAMs, HRS 2001 version 3.0. So these data do get updated. There's a version 1 that goes out, and they get updated afterward, and I think especially for the CAMs, it's going to be the imputations. So not everybody fills in every part of the survey, and this is particularly important, I think, for the either telephone or face-to-face, where people are asked for things like their incomes, and they may not respond to every question. Here, this is a mail-out survey, and so probably people actually fill in a number for most things. So here we are. A lot of these smaller parts of HRS give you a fairly sort of pithy look here. So here's a zip file. Clicking on it will download it, and it's not very large, half a meg, and I'll just show you what's in it. So here's the zip file that I got, and let me just close all the rest of this. Okay, how do you go from here? I'm a Stata person, so I really like just working with, in fact, it didn't come with the DTA file, which is a Stata data set. There's the .da file, which is the actual data set, and I bet if we looked at that, it's going to be text in a big rectangle. Yeah. So here's something, of course, that R or anything else could work with directly if you wanted to. They also have provided to you the .sas, that's for SAS, the .spss, the .dct and the .do are both Stata stuff that looks at it. And then they've given us these, at least one of these is going to be a code book. There it is. Okay. They have different names, but you're always going to find this kind of file within the distributions. Here's the code book. Sometimes the width is non-standard, so you got to maybe inch it out a bit depending on what you're looking at, depending on what you're using to look at it. Okay. How do you tell what's in the consumption activities mail survey? Section A is identification variables and activities. I guess let's stick with this. Another thing you could do is look for the questionnaire, which is probably one of these. Oh, there it is. That's really, yeah. I remember this now. That this is one of the nicest nicest ways of looking at this. This is the actual questionnaire, and so if we wanted to pick out what's in here, we might just look at the questionnaire. How much time did you spend? And here's watching movies or movies videos on TV. Hours last week. And so in particular, we're looking for care of individuals, right? And so let's see what we might be able to get as we kind of scroll through all this. Or we could just do a keyword search. Preparing meals, that's for personal grooming and hygiene.
Mm-hmm. Caring for pets.
One of the I've often wondered about this, because the thing about time use surveys is they often don't ask about things that they know people are not going to volunteer.
Yeah, well, and
how much time did you spend shooting up last week?
Well, this is an activities survey, which is different from a diary survey, where like.
I see a time. That's right.
Yeah,
different than a
diary survey.
Yeah.
They let people describe in their own words what they were doing, and then there's a coder who uses a coding scheme to decide where shooting up should go.
Yeah, where shooting up should go. Yeah.
Sure.
Care provider. Well, yeah. This is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing about providing our time of care probably is in the core survey as well.
Yeah.
So, to be honest, I think we're kind of drawing a blank. Let me switch over and show you what a, let's see, let's get all rid of this. So I keep my work in, or the data set rather, data/HRS, and I'm going to look at HRS 16. So the core data happens to look like this, and the code book folder. So these are the underlying distribution files from HRS. This is not the RAND file. The RAND file doesn't have all this extra stuff. And you'll always see this file, in this case h2016cb.txt, and I'm going to open that up in Emacs. And I'm going to look for it over here. Okay, so let's look for care, Medicare. Yeah, there are a lot of versions of care. Discussed medical care with others. Care arrangements. Nursing care. Time spent, right? We might want to do that at some point. Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? Finding a needle in a haystack. Time.
It's nice though that it does make our point that no one thinks enough about unpaid care work.
Unpaid care, yeah. Well, again, it's time spent on volunteering. Time spent. Okay, so there's time spent on health-related activities. I think we're getting
Yeah.
warm.
Yeah.
And so here also what you might look at in this underlying core is like, well, what section, what questionnaire are we talking about here? How to map that then is another challenge, isn't it? The questionnaire. How did you feel when you were at home? Lots of rich detail, and it's challenging just to figure out where in the world this is going to be. All right, so let me search backward for section. It's a leave behind questionnaire that was part of that. I wonder where that's going to show up here. So now I'm looking in the questionnaire subfolder of the distribution to try to find where this might be measured. Well, I think what we've demonstrated is it's hard sometimes to find what we're looking for. So maybe we'll do it offline and yeah.
Or I mean, this might be like a where I just spam the general help file and ask like, how do I pinpoint, caregiving and unpaid care work items?
Yeah.
To be able to.
Yeah, I think probably about a half an hour would get us an answer.
Okay.
We just have to to actually spend the half hour. Well, so with that as a warning in mind, would anybody else like to try their hand at seeing if we could find something in HRS that stimulated your interest? Yeah.
Nobody else has a compelling thing. Suicidal ideation.
And so how would we think about a question that would be phrased? Like how would?
In terms of like keyword searches.
Right.
I would think suicide.
Suicide.
Have you ever had thoughts of suicide?
Yeah, exactly. That's usually how it's phrased.
Okay, yeah, let's just see if we ask the concordance here. Okay, let's do all public data. I wonder if that's going to work. Suicide, core. Let's just click all these and see what happens. I don't myself use the concordance that much because I feel like this happens a fair amount. I like to just dig into the actual questionnaires.
And that you think it's in there somewhere and just this isn't turning it on?
I don't know because
Maybe searching anything related to death.
Well, that's going to pull up a lot. I mean, I think that'll be a successful search.
Or like self-harm?
Have you contemplated that?
Yeah, let me think. So there, trying to
If
remember.
it's asked about anywhere, it would most likely be with the depression module.
Okay.
In like CASD and stuff.
Yeah, that CESD is definitely in there. I've used those before. And now the thing is, and so here's one of the downsides to using the RAND file, that the CESD and all of its components are in the RAND file. Why don't I just show you that by looking back at the, let me change the name of this thing again, but okay. CESD. And I'm looking, I think, ideally for that.
Saw it in there.
Yeah, it's all through here. I'm just trying to find kind of the most parsimonious version of this.
Okay.
And so if you can, it's a little hard to see at this stage here, but we're going to find an R like 10 CESD variable that actually is the CESD index, and then all the components of it are these things like the R10 depress, which is an individual variable that measures one part of the CESD scale. Yeah. And so it's all in there. Now the problem is trying to sort of backtrack, if you will, from the RAND file. If you know it's in the RAND file, well, okay, well, I'd like to know whether we asked about suicide. And we could do keyword search for suicide in the RAND file, we're not finding it. Can we then figure out where in the survey this actually gets asked, and then work from there, let's say. So the problem is RAND is a very nice layer of this onion because it's very user-friendly. The problem is now we want to dig into the onion more, and we have to figure out, okay, well, where is this asked in the survey? And then we have to go dig into the core, the underlying core stuff. And so I'm just seeing still a bunch of diagnostics. Okay, there you go. Now finally we're seeing some, okay.
I see something that says end life. I wonder if that means end life.
It's enjoy life.
Oh, enjoy
yeah.
life.
And so let me see if I've got over here in Stata. Let's see what I got loaded in here. Okay, I've got something different. It's the CAMS data. Okay. But I can show you that in the RAND file, here's our most recent version. So if I do describe R12 CESD, that's the CESD score. If I could do a tabulate R12 CESD, and it tells you that it's a 0 to 8 scale that includes things like the R12 EN, and so here's the thing. So EN life, CESD enjoyed life is what you get when you hit describe. So that helps you a little bit more. And then the problem is that end life could mean end life, or it turns out it's actually enjoyed life. And that's kind of a challenge. So that's one of the components of this. And so now again, we're trying to find where in the world this shows up in the survey. And I think honestly what I might do now, so Swiss Army knife of how you do all this. Now I'm going to go back to my Emacs window where I've got the whole file H2016CB. So it's those 2016 wave, the actual code book. And now I'm going to say enjoy life. So here we've got a hit. Enjoyed life in the previous week. Think about the past week and the feelings you've experienced. Tell me if the following is true. Much of the time you enjoyed life. What else is around here? Did you feel lonely? That's part of the CESD, I think. Did you feel happy? How often did you feel happy? I guess it's a yes, no, did you feel it? Okay. So here it is. It's in section D. And so now what we might do, and I know I'm getting whiplash myself as I'm doing this, when we're in the weeds, we're in the weeds, aren't we? If we looked at the questionnaire folder and we looked for the D element, let's see if I can zoom in and show you what I'm looking at here. Here's the D in there. It's part of the name. And now let's hit open section D in cognition, and I'm hoping if we hit enjoy, we might find that, yeah, so there's the question D115, did you enjoy life? Felt sad, could not get going. And so now that we're in this big section of the actual HRS core, let's look for the word suicide. Okay, so it's not showing up, and I think it must mean that at least in the core survey, they did not use the word suicide. There is the CESD score of depression. I guess we might be able to measure it with a cause of death, if that actually happened. The suicidal thoughts.
Last ditch, like the word harm.
Harm?
Like self-harm or something.
Yeah. Well, it's not showing up. Again, and we can go back to our blunt instrument here of harm. Not finding much help there. Suicidal. Well, thanks and sorry.
No, that's useful information to know that it's not there. And and I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't think the CESD actually asks about suicidal thoughts. So.
I think that's right. Yeah, and it's a 2-hour survey. They're trying to kind of hit the highlights, and so they will miss things. This also includes here, so questions about memory. Let's get rid of this. So here's it's word recall. So if you're interested in cognition, there's a big, extensive thing in here about that. One of the things we were concerned with, of course, with our research with foreign-born folks is the language in which this would be stated, and that might be very interesting. As you've seen, these are the English language versions of the questionnaires. They do interview also in Spanish if it's requested, and so that might be an interesting thing to look at that presumably would be facilitated by this. One of the big things you see actually too in health and immigrant status is what is the meaning of things like are you in excellent health versus very good health? Because the word is different in different languages, and also the meaning of the word tends to be different. A little extemporaneous, sort of improvising about things that you could do. Other questions, other thoughts that people would like to look up quickly?
Yeah, not to look at any particular data, but I actually wanted to voice like a more global concern.
Okay.
Which may not be a concern for a lot of people, but since you think it's a longitudinal survey, and it is, because you see the same variables measured in every wave, but what I heard from some people that at least in some questions or some modules, some questions are not asked to the same people, like every wave.
Well, that's a good question.
So they are asking this, so let's say how long, or let's say how many hours per week you were depressed. So they would ask person A in one wave and then in the third wave. And then they ask person B the same question in the second wave and in the fourth wave. So like they alternate them in that way.
Well, with that particular variable, I don't think that's quite true. But there might be other variables. I mean, we're talking about, because of the household structure, it's possible that a particular person gets asked a particular thing in one wave. It could be the financial respondent, for example, is what they call that person. But for something like, do you think the example was in particular depression?
I think it was about one of those modules about.
Oh, well, if it's a module, so that's something that doesn't repeat often. And even when it is in the survey, the module tends to be asked of only about maybe a quarter of the respondents. Let me assure you that if it's in the core, like the RAND file is, so here again, I'm looking at the RAND file, and the variable that measures this part of the CESD that's depression, we've got, so I guess in the first wave it was maybe phrased differently, but since the second wave it's there, R2 through R12, and if you were to look at, let's see, list HHIDPN and R depressed, let's see what we get here in Well, sorry for the. Let me try edit. That might be better to actually see these data a little bit better. Okay. So when I've done this now, it pulls up this matrix basically of what's going on here. And so I think this .s is an interesting missing variable there. And here's somebody who answers it for 4 times and then stops answering. I think they probably died, but they might also be non-respondents. And so here's somebody who answers it throughout. This is an interesting one, isn't it? It's the state dependence, or well, you know, that's a what you can. It's not an absorbing state, right? You can be depressed in one wave, but not in all the waves. This person was not, and then yes, 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 and then no, 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 no. And here's somebody who was yes, no, yes, no, 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 no. Okay. Most of these things in the core data are there for all of the waves in which response was recorded. And it is true that some people are non-respondents, but the coverage is pretty good, though.
But I just thought it was like a design thing that some people were asked during the alternating waves.
Well, biomarkers are only collected every other wave, and those include things like the blood composition. I think your DNA only gets partially sequenced once, probably. I don't think they do it again because it presumably won't change, right? But things like your blood pressure, your ability to stand, it's like a tandem stand or something like that. It's physical measures of sort of your balance and things like that. So that will only get measured every other wave. And the reason is it's very expensive to do it. You got to send somebody out to the house. So those types of measures are only, say, in 2006, and they skip the 2008 wave, but they're in 2010. Yeah.
How about memory?
Memory. I think those are asked of every wave. Let's have a look. We just saw that. It was here. The word recall. So we've got to figure out what in the world this variable might be called. Here's the actual HRS code book for that. Let's now look at the RAND file, and if you're like me, you can't remember what in the world they're calling these. So I guess the page numbers give you some sense that there are 1,634 pages of documentation for RAND. Let's look at this and let's look for memory. Word recall might be another way of keyword searching here. My guess is that memory is going to be measured every wave for people who are respondents. But the challenge is to find imputed cognition, self-reported memory. What you might be talking about is maybe what's called word recall, number series score, delayed word recall. Okay, so so it took a while to find it, and I'm sorry for clicking away very quickly. Let's see if I can go back there. It pulls up a bunch of things here. If we look more closely, this is probably what you're referring to, and it probably was what we're looking at in the other part of the documentation. Immediate word recall and delayed word recall looks to me a lot like this that we just saw. Fit fairly well. So, right, we just have to make this up as we go along. Is this what we want? We don't know. We'll have a look and see whether, in fact, this is the right part of the study. So R10, let's say IMRC, and I can just copy and paste that into Stata. So let's just do a describe R10 IMRC. Whoops, it's all, okay, so the case is wrong. Okay, immediate word recall, and one might be a little concerned about what that actually measures without deeper knowledge, but if we do a tabulate, we come up with this rather interesting histogram. We can even do a histogram, couldn't we? Histogram R10 word recall. Sorry, what's the IMRC? R10 IMRC. So most people were getting sort of 5 or 6, and if we look back at the way this was asked, it looked like max was 10 that you could do, so you get about half of them. And we could even do an immediate word recall, and then there's another one, right? Where were we looking back here? Immediate and final word recall. That might be kind of fun. Delayed word recall. And what's that called? That's called R10 DLRC. So we could do a scatter of the R10 DMRC, that's the delayed memory recall, I guess that's what that is, DMRC. R10, immediate memory recall, IMRC, and let's do a scatter plot. Oh, I got it wrong somehow. DLRC. So here, the RAND file is trying to help us a little bit with these variable names, but I'm definitely screwing it up quite a bit. Oh dear, well there's a problem that, I mean, you can't really see the correlation because these are all these, integer values from 0 to 10. It does suggest that there's this upward, sort of line there, and it's a little hard to kind of pick it out. You could also run a correlation, I guess. The question you had was, do we see these? Let's look at the delayed word recall just for kicks, I guess. For individuals year after year after year, and I'm sorry, I had to do edit, which gives us a better view of this. Edit. And, well, isn't that interesting? Oh, these are different variables that we're seeing. So now I need to be a little bit more particular in what I'm asking for, because we're seeing DLRC and FDLRC, which must be something else. So let's just try this again. Let's try wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, wave 4. I guess it wasn't done in wave 2. So, and then it's a different variable in wave 1, isn't it? But wave 3 and wave 4. The other thing that I often do is look starting at wave 4. And the reason is the survey came into its final form in 1998. That's wave 4. Yeah. So there does seem to be some funny turbulence in this question across some of the waves. But there, again, I think we see evidence that people are answering it repeatedly. So how would one want to proceed? Well, you might look at, for an individual, and then across individuals, the average, I guess. You might imagine that if you took a cohort, you might well see a decline, right? The word recall probably declines over age. And what would you do there? Well, you might in Stata, you might collapse into mean R4 DLRC and R5 and R6. And so what the collapse function does is take whatever you ask of it, in this case the mean or the average, of these variables. Well, what we want to do here, over age or something, the average, we could also take a single cohort of individuals. Yeah. We could do a box plot. You want to think, the way I visualize it is sort of you want age along that, so you might think about looking at a birth cohort. If RAB year is equal to 1935, you could do that, or 31. Let's see, what's the 1935 is a decent one, I guess. And let's put a few more of these in here. DLRC. And so what that's going to do is it's going to take everybody who was born in 1935 and, I think I need to do a by, don't I? Yeah.
With Lexis, like heat diagrams.
Yeah.
So you can look at the cohort and watch them change color.
That might work. So I'm getting different columns. Oh, that's good. They don't decline that much, do they? There's the average, falling from about 5 words recalled to about 4 over the space of 5 waves, or about 10 years. And there's a standard error and a confidence interval. It looks like up here, this is outside the confidence interval that this one is looking at. So that's one way of kind of assessing it. Other things people would like to look at or talk about? Where do we take this from here? How many feel comfortable with the data set? I mean, you probably have questions at this point, like, well, how do I do anything? How do I find out whether the data actually has what I want? That's the big thing we've been hitting our heads against.
I actually had a question about the restricted use
Yes.
data. What's your experience with like the process of requesting it and actually getting it? And do you have any insights about?
Yeah, there's heterogeneity, and they've also been changing policies a bit over the years. I think if you're interested in restricted access data, which include things like this, the Social Security earnings histories, the Medicare beneficiary records, the geocodes, and I think in modern social science dissertation research, the geocodes might be a very strong and powerful thing to go after, because what you can do is find somebody in a state and link in some other data in that way and look for these natural experiments in which policies or something are changing across state lines. So how do you do that? And the answer is you apply for access to the restricted data. In our case, and I think in every case, you're going to need to go through the Human Subjects Institutional Review Board, the IRB. And yeah, and I'm thinking about this, and is Berkeley's better or the same or worse than everybody else? And I don't know, maybe they're all the same. I mean, it's a difficult process. And you'll have to go through that to explain what you're going to do and how to keep the stuff secure. And I think that, to be honest, the biggest impediment is usually the following, that HRS has already collected the data, and the problem is that IRBs are usually in the business of advising PIs who are collecting new data on what to do and how to protect it and all that. And so that, at least in my experience in earlier scenarios, has been the big problem, that you're trying to tell the IRB, we are trying to figure out how to protect the test subjects in the HRS. They have collected the data already. We're not collecting it. We're just going to use it in a secure fashion. How do you use it in a secure fashion is probably the big question. And what are the steps to use it in a secure fashion? How do you use it? Well, the great news here is that there is a way of remotely accessing the database securely. Yeah. And you're nodding your head. Have you done this yourself?
I have, yes.
Yeah.
We actually do that with
Yeah.
Stanford right now, so yeah.
Yeah, so David Rakoff has had this set up for a while now, and we got this set up through it's like a Microsoft virtual desktop, I think. I think it has to be a Windows machine.
Macs, at least we use Macs.
Oh, good. I'm glad, because when we set it up, they said, well, you have to use Windows. Yeah, and it can be a workstation then that needs to sit in a locked office. That's one of the big things, without a window that people can see in, and it needs to have a notarized form that you sign as the user of the data. So there are administrative sort of hoops like that, and they take time, but we can help walk you through how to do it. So if you want to do something with HRS, there are people to help, and it will probably take a little while. It'll take going through the IRB, but it can then be very straightforward. You can use a workstation here at Berkeley or Stanford or SF State or wherever it is, as long as it's a secure environment, so nobody can just walk in and take the machine or use it or anything like that. It's got the two-step authentication that we have now here at Cal, and Stanford probably is the same, and SF State probably is the same thing. So you log in with a secure two-step kind of thing, and then you're off and running. They can upload your program file, so you don't have to reprogram everything over from scratch, and you can work in that environment, and then you submit what you have found to the HRS guardians, who then look at it and probably use an algorithm to see what you've written out and to make sure that it doesn't identify anybody individually. Yeah. Yes?
What kind of things are people doing with the data?
Well, I'll say a few things, and then maybe you'd like to expound on this too. That one thing that you can do is look at the informational content of an individual's first name. And you can do this for a variety of different populations, but what has been done a lot in the literature is looking at African American first names, Hispanic first names, and then also like things like biblical first names, like whether you're named, David or John or things like that, or used to be things like Ezekiel, right, or stuff like that back in past census data.
Photography or something.
Sorry?
Is that photography? Like looking at names?
Looking at names, and then what it means to be named Ezekiel rather than Bud.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one thing. Another thing is that you can look at the restricted biomarker data. The blood composition stuff sits behind access walls. You can't see that in the public release data. And there are many other things as well, but let me pause there and say, well, what have you been working on?
We don't use this particular survey, but or actually my colleagues, they're using a survey on absenteeism data. So they're looking at people who work at production plants and they see and then they're looking at, like disability and how that affects their work progress and stuff. And so sometimes people are gone for days and sometimes people die from diseases. And so just to be able to look at those work files, and then their cause of death and stuff like that, we have to actually utilize that restricted data because people want to do medical data. And a lot of times in order to get their cause of death, we can't actually get that from the companies. We get that from the indices, and we need their social security. So a lot of these identifying markers that were mentioned need to be accessed in order for us to create those data sets. And I can't just download it to my Mac and go away with it.
Yeah.
And do they have linked social security? Does HRS?
HRS has linked.
Security earnings.
Yeah.
Like that's all.
That's right. So
special
it is
secret.
special access stuff, and so that stuff I had accessed in an earlier sort of vintage of the access methods. That the other way traditionally you could do this, and Ken Walker and Amel had done this. You can have the data set sent to you like on CD-ROM or whatever it was back in the day, and it sounds so antiquated now, right? At least it wasn't a 3.5-inch floppy. But they could send you the data, and then the stuff ends up on a secured, not networked workstation in a locked office. And so that's how I looked at that, and it was remarkable because you could see these histories. It would be annual data, so it wasn't super high. It wasn't monthly or daily or something crazy like that, but still, it was annual earnings records for these individuals back from like the 1940s and ahead.
With like no response nonsense.
Right, it's all there.
The Social Security Agency knows.
They measure it. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That said, of course, HRS data really does have quite good, response rates. So if you wanted to measure income, that's.
And what about sort of top coding on income and stuff like that?
Oh, top coding. Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm sure that happens, and I would to learn more about it. I haven't spent much time thinking about it. I would probably look at the RAND file and see top coding. Look for top coded.
But I mean, if you could get the non-top coded one in Social Security earnings.
Well, the problem with that is that covered earnings are always top coded because right
because of the law.
Yeah, and so whether they're top coded beyond that, I don't know.
Right.
They wouldn't have to be,
IRS,
right? Yeah, they wouldn't.
Like
Right.
the IRS.
The IRS stuff. Yeah, they'll right. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? In the slides there's material about other things like I thought of Gretchen about this one, the harmonized HRS. Just to keep it brief, just saying a few things about this. That this ends up looking a lot like the RAND file. The harmonized HRS is almost the same thing. It's just it adds a few other variables and drops a bunch, I think. And it was intended to provide this ability to compare across all these different countries and these different longitudinal surveys. I've not done that myself, but I think it's a successful and rather lucrative research effort there that USC is doing.
Do you know if this is just sort of open to everybody? I mean, it's
public.
Publicly available?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great, because so many of the actual surveys themselves are just embargoed, like,
there. I'm sure part of the question is whether you can just go to the Gateway to Global Aging, and just sign up there and get all the data or not. Because that would really be helpful if you could do that and sort of skip all the extra steps of signing up for HRS and signing up for ELSA and signing up and signing up and signing up and signing up. And historically that had always been the problem. I don't know, I've not worked with it, but so it's there, and it's good to know that there's an intention anyway of trying to make it, sort of user friendly. Yeah. there is genetic data. I could talk about a bunch of the other nooks and crannies, but I guess I was thinking it probably would be best just to take any other questions there might be from the floor about particular subject areas that you're interested in. Would folks like to see some static code? That's the other option. Yes.
Very obvious
Sure.
sort of big
Yeah.
picture question. So we looked a little bit at the RAND longitudinal, and then we looked at some other files that seem to be more specific. For people who are approaching this data set de novo, where would you recommend starting in terms of file types, and what does the RAND data set have that others do? Is it just that the variables are a little bit cleaner? Why would I not just stick with the RAND longitudinal cut?
Yeah, I would start with the RAND longitudinal. So that'd be my suggestion. Start with RAND.
And how does it differ from the individual widths? Is it just that
it leaves a lot of stuff out.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so, it might quickly be the case that what you want to look at is not in the RAND cleaned file.
Got it.
But it might well be that in fact you can answer a lot of the questions that you have just using the RAND file. And it certainly is much more user-friendly because the variables make sense. They don't have these weird alphanumeric names. They have things that look more like actual variable names.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the issue is, so you need to use this HID PN, the individual identifier, then to link. I would start with the RAND data set and link to anything else you might need in a different nook or cranny of the HRS.
So merging in variables based on ID and wave that are not included in RAND.
That's what I would do.
Trying to like Frankenstein together.
Right.
1 through 12 years old.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
That's
So
good.
start with RAND. Yeah, yeah.
I had a general question about, so there are a number of questions that you measure about attitudes or opinions or feelings and such, and sometimes you would want to use dimensionality reduction methods like factor analysis and PCA and whatnot on those, because they're kind of similar. But what I find is that when you try to do that, the factors exactly match those sets of questions that start with the same identifier. I don't know, let's say a set of questions starts with, I think there are 2 letters, and then there's a number. Is it like how they're measured in the original?
In the original underlying data. So I'm not sure I'm there yet, but let me try to repeat what I think you're saying to understand. So HRS has lots of measures, and what you're telling me is that you would like to use a statistical approach to reduce the number of measures that you've got, to extract the information out of a whole bunch. Right. Parsimonialize it, right? If that's a word. Yes. Make it smaller. Okay, I understand that part, and now I didn't understand the next part, which is that you said when you do that, it just returns to you the structure that's already there in some sense about.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like, for instance, a set of questions, like a dozen questions on your well-being. It has this module code that it belongs to, I don't know, was it HM or HD, I don't know.
Okay.
I forgot the exact naming convention, and then there are the number of the number that identifies the question.
Okay.
So the first digit of that number represents the whole set of these questions.
Okay.
And then the second two digits identify the specific questions within that set.
Okay.
On the topic.
So.
And all I'm saying is that somehow you don't really need to do that sometimes, because when I try to do this in Stata, for instance, it actually identifies all these questions as one factor, right?
It sort of adds them all together.
Yeah.
And so, maybe that's good. Then.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
But I'm just saying.
So you don't have to run the complicated statistical analysis.
Right.
You just add all the measures within a particular section. Okay.
Yeah. And I feel like they might as well have added this as a factor, and I'm not sure why don't they?
Well, I think I understand. Although, to be honest, I think I'm also, I'm lost on the technicalities of it because I haven't ever done it. HRS is used by many, many different researchers. Maybe that's sort of the takeaway here. And some folks are going to want to look at just one small question there, rather than sort of a meta question that's formed of all these little things, even if they kind of all answer the same. One of the benefits is that it's been used broadly, and you can tell, some fairly reasonable anecdotal stories about it, in addition to doing some pretty heavy-duty, numeric stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
It's interesting. I'd not heard that before. I wonder whether it had actually informed the evolution of the data over time, or the evolution of the way the survey is asked.
I mean, conceptually, it should match, and the fact that you can prove it quantitatively, that seems like it's a good thing, as you said, because
I don't know the answer, but it may well have guided the way that the survey has evolved. So that's the other thing I think to point out here is that the survey has and continues to evolve. I think in smaller steps than it had, back at the dawn of it all. But you will find, if you need to reach all the way back to 1992 outside of the RAND file, stuff gets a little weird because it would look different back then. The other thing I will say is, so suppose you're interested in something like the childhood retrospectives, which I don't think I talked a lot about, but there are exit interviews, core, childhood health retrospectives. I wonder where that went. Okay. If you're interested in these, they started in 2008. So prior to that, there are some limited questions on childhood health and conditions. But if you want to measure sort of everything, unfortunately you're stuck with the people who were alive and responding in 2008 and later. So this gives you this amazing look into things. Measles, mumps, diabetes, allergies is a great one. It's not specific, but at least it asks about allergies, which is kind of cool. Honestly, when you're a parent, you think about this all the time. So our daughter actually was diagnosed with an egg allergy. Anyway, but you think about this sort of thing. It's like, well, how much is this because we can just measure this now versus some kind of environmental hazard that maybe has raised the exposure to this sort of thing? I have no idea. Anyway, in addition, we get parents smoking, which is really a remarkable thing when you think about it, right? Another pocket of the HRS data, the restricted data, the question was, what do you do with the restricted data? The genetic data is another big sort of pioneering area in HRS and in many other data sets too, where it turns out that there actually are some of these SNPs, I guess. I'm trying to remember what they're called in the genetic data. So this is not my cup of tea. What do we find? It's some part, I'm sorry, there we go. Something like 2.5 million pieces called SNPs of information per person, right? It's just a crazy thing. And that some of these, it turns out, are come back with hits in these GWAS, the genome-wide association studies, of being connected to smoking, which is just fascinating. So that's another direction that folks have been using HRS and other data sets to look at. It's not my specialty, but it's feasible here. In addition, of course, just learned behavior. Of course, some of it, the one challenge, and it's unfortunate that we do not have any sequencing of the DNA of the parents. So that's never been done in HRS, probably infeasible at this point. And also the children, we don't have their sequencing. Other questions? Thank you all for attending. I'll stick around in case you'd like to chat, and I do intend to make a Google group that people can opt out of with our attendance sheet, and I think that would be helpful just to give everybody a head start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.